Well, my friends, so begins the journey into the dramatic conclusion of the Southern Reach trilogy. You will know that this book is different than the other books in that it's a multi-POV cast. So whereas Annihilation was the biologist and Authority was Control, now we have Ghostbird, Control, the Lighthouse Keeper, and the Psychologist all jam-packed into 300-ish or so pages, which, again, I know how this book ends, but I don't remember the dynamics, the cool stuff, like how all these POVs come together, so I'm excited to dive into it. Let me know how you're feeling so far. I know we're only about 59 pages in, but things are getting juicy already. Jeff Vandermeer is wasting no time whatsoever, so let us begin with 000X, the director, 12th Expedition. So the great thing about this chapter is we are seeing the events. It wasn't at the end of Annihilation, but it's when the biologist and the psychologist, they finally came together again, or I should say the biologist found the psychologist wasting away with a broken leg after jumping out of the lighthouse. But we get it from her POV. But not only that, this is a second person account. So let me know, why do you think Jeff Vandermeer chose that POV versus making it a journal of the psychologist, which I guess that's impossible, or just a third person POV thing like we saw with Authority and Control? Maybe it's because she exists in this kind of weird, timeless space. I have no idea. But let's get into it, shall we? Just out of reach, just beyond you out there. The rush and froth of the surf, the sharp smell of the sea, the crisscrossing shape of the gulls, their sudden jarring cries, an ordinary day in Area X, an extraordinary day, the day of your death. That is a hell of an opening line, and I cut it at the M-dash, but anyway, we see here that Jeff Vandermeer loves weird words. He loves weird biological words, which makes sense in the context of this story, but glottal, here we go again, which is, it's part of your throat if I remember correctly. But to come to rest finally. So the psychologist leapt out of the lighthouse against her will, we find, which is kind of cool. But this is where she ends, and it's a very spiritual experience. It's a very personal experience. But this is not where her tale ends, is it? The whisper is familiar. Is your house in order? Who said that? Well, we know Lowry said that, acting as the voice for Control. But the throbbing of your shoulder from the encounter in the tower is much worse. Made you leap out into that blazing blue expanse, even though you hadn't wanted to. So against your will. Interesting. Some communication, some trigger between the wound and the flame that came dancing across the reeds betrayed your sovereignty. So we do know later in the chapter, we get a sense of what it's like to cross into Area X with the psychologist and Whitby. And I'm wondering if this is just the culmination of all of that stuff. Did she get her wound beforehand? I don't know. Because it is noted that the encounter in the tower is much worse. So is that right now? Or is that a while back and this wound has been festering? Maybe I didn't read closely enough. Let me know in the comments. So soon after, there comes the crunch of boots, and disoriented, you shout, "Annihilation, annihilation!" But it doesn't work because the biologist is no longer hypnotized. It's just me, the biologist. Where's the surveyor, you ask? Back at the base camp, she tells you. Wouldn't come with you. Of course not, because she notes that afraid of the biologist, afraid of the burgeoning flame, just like you. It was a disaster. You helped create it. You panicked and you gave up. Not true. You never gave up, but you nod anyway, thinking of so many mistakes. So she is, again, resigned. That's what I love about the interplay here between the dialogue and her sort of monologue that's going on in her head, is that a lot of her monologue is counter to or in direct opposition of what she's actually saying. What does the border look like? A child's question. I'll tell you when I get there. What really happens when we cross over? Not what you might expect. What did you hide from us about Area X? Nothing that would have helped you. Not really. I'm sorry, but I have to do this. The biologist tells you, almost as if she knows you can still hear her. I have no choice. The biologist takes a sample from your infected shoulder. We remember this from Annihilation. I don't know what to say to you. I'm angry. I'm frightened. I'd say rest in peace, but I don't think you will. And then she is gone, and you miss her. That weight of a human being beside you. So even though she was using the biologist as a tool, even though she kind of didn't like her very much, I guess, she is revealing her humanity to us, right? Because that absence, right, of a human being beside her, where she's all alone, and it appears as if she was searching for a human in Area X later on. And then you're dissolving into the wind, taken up over the still lakes, rising up across the marsh, It's black water, then sharply up into the sky again. You half expect to see Lowry there, but instead there's just the biologist trudging back down the darkening path and waiting beyond, muling in the distress, the altered psychologist from the expedition before the 12th. There we go. We also get to see the aftermath of this as well. So what's interesting here is it's such a spiritual ascendant kind of experience, because she's dying, but she's aware. At least we think she is, because the whole thing is told in second person. So really, who knows? And so there's this kind of weird in between, this kind of purgatory of consciousness and not. But I'd be curious of your thoughts down in the comments below. Why do you feel the scene is playing out like this? It doesn't really feel like necessarily a distant third person thing. It feels more personal to me anyway. As you curve back around, the lighthouse fast approaches. A shape huddled there, leaking light. Interesting verb there. What a sad figure sleeping there, dissolving there. You're not down there. Oh no, you're up here. And there's still an interrogation going on. One that will repeat until you have given up every answer. So what does that mean? To me, that's like she's locked again in this purgatory of some sort. And we do know that we're going back in time. We're learning a lot about the psychologist and sort of how she got here. And it's also a lot of repetition of things that we kind of assumed or other characters somewhat knew, but it's definitely given to us in more concrete fashion. But I love it because interrogation, we all know interrogation was a big part, or is a big part, of all three of these books. Which brings us to part 1, Range Light. 0001, the lighthouse keeper. Overhauled the lens machinery and cleaned the lens, fixed the water pipe in the garden, small repair to the gate, organized the tools and shovels, etc. in the shed, S and SB visit. So this is kind of, this is Saul's journal, I guess. And that winter morning, the wind was cold against the collar of Saul Evans' coat as he trudged down the trail toward the lighthouse. I'm so excited. Finally, we get to meet old Saul. He's not just a myth, but we get to experience his life before the event. We also get to experience how the event started, which is, I'm really curious to hear how you guys feel about that, because it's given to us to a degree. It's of course not specified entirely as to how things happen. Maybe we'll learn about that a little bit later, but it's such an interesting thing, and I'm curious to see if there's any symbolism there once we get deeper into the text. But the brisk, fresh salt smell to the air had an edge of flame, a burning smell from some nearby house or still smoldering bonfire. More interesting parallels here, because we know that the psychologist referred to the biologist as the flame, but regardless if that was the intent, this is a very evocative sentence. Saul had lived in the lighthouse for 4 years before he'd met Charlie, his partner. Charlie had the lean, muscular torso, strong shoulders, and stout legs of a man who had spent much of his adult life on boats, hauling in nets, and the flat belly of someone who didn't spend too many nights out drinking. So Charlie is clearly the stud in the relationship. I mean, at least as we know so far. We haven't really got a great description of, well, I guess we did in the photos of Saul. But thanking the God who made him, what a perfect specimen he is. Some things came to you late, but late was better than never. Soon the lighthouse rose solid and tall above him. It served as a day mark so boats could navigate the shallows, but also was lit at night half the week, corresponding to the schedules of commercial traffic farther out to sea. So we all know how lighthouses work and what their purpose is, but I thought that was cool to note how we actually have created sort of a utility for the lighthouse finally, versus it being just some kind of monolithic structure of the unknown. As a preacher, he thought he had known a kind of peace, a kind of calling, but only after his self-exile, giving all that up, had Saul truly found what he was looking for. Preaching had been projecting out, imposing himself onto the world, with the world then projecting onto him. But tending to the lighthouse, that was a way of looking inward, and it felt less arrogant. Here he knew nothing but the practical, learned from his predecessor. So Saul's kind of a monk in a way, right? We know he's a preacher, but he's chosen a very Spartan life, a very simple life, and one where he can do simple things and not feel like he's being arrogant and sort of putting himself out there, which, right? The irony, right? Because he is clearly the topographical anomaly, or part of it anyway, and he is pushing himself out. So I love that parallel where we have him kind of rejecting being a standard preacher because he thought it was arrogant and wanting to look more inward. And now exactly what has happened? Well, he is sort of pushing Area X out, I guess you could say, imposing himself onto the world. But that afterglow faded when he saw what awaited him in the gravel parking lot. A familiar beat-up station wagon stood there, and beside it, the usual 2 Seance and Science Brigade recruits. Here we go. We're finally meeting these people in the flesh. They were always present now, taking measurements and photographs, dictating statements into their bulky tape recorders, making their amateur movies, intent on finding what? We don't know. He knew the history of the coast here, the way that distance and silence magnified the mundane, how into those spaces and the fog and the empty line of the beach, thoughts could turn to the uncanny and begin to create a story out of nothing. So interesting observation by Saul here. So it's just kind of mysterious, the forgotten coast, right? And just being here sort of makes you feel almost like a satellite or like a conduit, right, to something extraterrestrial maybe. But I am really curious, was there a reason? Was there a reason why this weird piece of alien-like glass stuff that he finds under the plant, was there a reason it landed here? Or was it just coincidence and he's hypothesizing? They travel in pairs so they could have their seance and their science both, and he sometimes wondered about their conversations, how full of contradictions they must be. Indeed, and that's what's so interesting about this group, this organization, is that they are completely contradictory. You have hard science and you have like this mysticism even. Lately, the same two had come by, a man and a woman, both in their 20s. Henry and Suzanne. It turned out she was the scientist and the man was the investigator of the uncanny. A little bit like X-Files, I guess, right? Henry didn't seem to care about worldly things like the winter weather because he always wore some variation on a delicate blue button-down silk shirt with dress slacks. Suzanne seemed more like what people today called a hippie, but would have called a communist or bohemian when Saul was growing up. She had blonde hair and wore a white embroidered peasant blouse and a brown suede skirt down below her knee. So they are quite the pair. The two have never given him their last names, although one or the other had said something that sounded like Sarum List. What does that mean? Is that going to be significant? Note it. Mentally note that. Saul, you don't look very happy, though. It's a beautiful day, Henry said. Saul, it's a beautiful day, Suzanne added. This time it was about something called necromantic doubling, which had to do with building a room of mirrors and darkness, as far as he could tell. Henry thinks the beacon could operate much like a room, Suzanne said. Are you familiar with these theories? Henry was trying not to seem winded as they are ascending the lighthouse. He brought mics, headphones, UV light readers, 8mm film, and a couple of machines featuring dials, knobs, and other indicators. No, Saul said. He didn't know what she was talking about, just as he hadn't known what Henry meant when he'd said they were studying the Tewa, or terror, of the region. We know what that is. That is Whitby's terroir. Prebiotic particles, Henry managed in a jovial and wheezy tone. Ghost energy. As Suzanne backed that up with a longish lecture about mirrors and things that could peer out of mirrors and how you might look at something sideways and know more about its true nature than head on, he wondered if Henry and Suzanne were lovers even. I'll meet you up there, he said finally. Once from this vantage, he'd seen something vast rippling through the water beyond the sandbars, a kind of shadow. The grayness so dark and deep it had formed a thick, smooth shape against the blue. Very reminiscent of the Leviathans in Control's dream. So that's why it's of interest to us, what with the way the lens wound up here, and how it relates to the whole history of both lighthouses, Suzanne said. And behind her, Henry was about ready to collapse. This big boy can't quite make it. How long are you here for this time? Saul asked. This time our permit allows us access through the end of the year. Some old injury or accident or birth meant his head was bent to the right. Huh. Just a reminder, you can touch the beacon, but you can't in any way interfere with its function. When he was satisfied they had settled in and were unlikely to disturb anything, he gave them a nod and laughed. And below, Saul busied himself with the grounds and organizing the tool shed, which had become a mess. The girl, Gloria, the psychologist, snuck up on him while he was inspecting the boat he kept behind the shed. The shed abutted a ridge of soil, and coquina, I think, if I remember correctly, that's how you say it. Remember that? That is what. That is how everybody, while hypnotized, saw the topographical anomaly, not made of flesh like it truly is, parallel to the beach and a line of rocks stretching out to sea. She was a solid, tall presence for her age, big for 9. 9.5, she would correct him. So there she was again, a sturdy figure on the rocks in her winter weather gear. You know, my ancestors lived here, she said. Mama says they lived right here, where the lighthouse is. She had a deep and level voice for one so young, which sometimes startled him. So did mine, child. Not before mine. Does it matter? The child frowned. I think so, she said, picking up the conversation. I think it does. I'm 1/8 Indian, he said. I was here too, part of me. So what? She annoyed him much of the time, but he hadn't yet been able to shake her loose. Her father lived in the middle of the country somewhere, and her mother worked 2 jobs from a bungalow up the coast. Very sad existence for Gloria, but also we can tell that it's facilitating a relationship between these two people. And the lighthouse held a kind of fascination for Gloria. And in the winter, too, she would be by herself a lot anyway. Who were those strange people coming around here? Who exactly do you mean? The ones with the pipes? Pipes. Oh, they weren't pipes. They were something else. They were from the island up the coast. Their base was still on Failure Island. Interesting name there, right? Doing tests. But the rumors also insinuated that the SNSB had some more sinister agenda. The truth was he didn't know what they were doing out there on the island. They don't like me, she said, and I don't like them. Are you laughing at me? No, he said. No, I'm not. You're a curious person. You ask questions. That's why they don't like you. What's wrong with asking questions? Nothing. Everything. Don't let them ask questions. You're already giving them the answers, even if they don't know it. But you're curious too, she said. Why do you say that? You guard the light, and the light sees everything. The light might see everything, but he'd forgotten a few last tasks that would keep him out of the lighthouse for longer than he liked. Staring up then, he saw Henry staring down from the railing far above. Dizzy, Saul looked away, only to see something, here we go, glittering from the lawn, half hidden by a plant rising from a tuft of weeds near where he'd found a dead squirrel a couple of days ago. Glass? A key? The dark green leaves formed a rough circle, obscuring whatever lay at its base. He knelt, shielded his gaze, but the glinting thing was still hidden by the leaves of the plant. Or was it part of a leaf? Whatever it was delicate beyond measure, yet perversely reminded him of the 4-ton lens far above his head. Interesting, right? So it's this crazy little tiny thing, but it's reminding him of the lens, right? Which the lighthouse is a beacon. Could this be a beacon? Probably. He had gloves on still, so he knelt beside the plant and reached for the glittering thing. Was it a tiny shifting spiral of light? It reminded him of what you might see staring into a kaleidoscope, except an intense white. He felt a sliver enter his thumb. Nothing now glittered on the ground in front of him. No light at the base of the plant. So this weird thing burrowed into his thumb, and it's completely gone. What's wrong? Gloria asked. Did you get stung? I don't know, he said. Yes, is something wrong, Saul? Henry asked. Nothing is wrong, he said. Just pricked my thumb. I'm fine, Henry. Don't worry about me. Maybe it was an electric shock. Maybe. The gleam of the man's eyes was the light of a cold beacon coming to Saul from far off, as if Henry were broadcasting some other message entirely. Nothing is wrong, Saul said again. Nothing was wrong, was it? Such a weird way to perceive this man, Henry. What does that mean? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. Maybe Saul is already changing. Which brings us to 00002 Ghostbird. On the third day in Area X, with Control as her sullen companion, Ghostbird found a skeleton in the reeds. It was winter in Area X now, which is so cool because I've always pictured this place as being just this tropical, always green, humid area, you know, because it's modeled after Florida, of course. But now it's winter. I'm sure there's some subtext with that, right? Because we are nearing the end. Far above, where the sky became a deeper blue, she caught a hint of some reflective surface, identified it as a wheeling cone of storks, the sun glinting silver from their white and gray feathers as they spun up into the sky at a great distance, and with a stern authority, that's the book we just read, headed where? Exactly. Is this just a mirage, some kind of illusion? Or are these birds confused? Do they know they can't get the hell out of here? I don't know. What is it? He asked, being Control. Birds. Birds. Yes, birds. Staring down at her, did the storks recognize what they saw? Were they reporting back to someone or something? There had already been some misunderstandings about their relationship. Who was in charge? Indeed. He'd taken back his name because he lost it, Control, asked that she call him Control again rather than John. Some animal shells were vital to their survival. Some animals couldn't live for long without them. Such a beautiful way to say that. What would I be to you back in the world? You at one of your old jobs, me at my old job? She would be suspect, an enemy of the right and true. What's wrong? Is something wrong? Nothing, probably, she said. And after a moment, she found the orange again. Oh yeah, I forgot they spotted this orange in the reeds, in the grass. See it? Yes, it's a surveyor's mark. We just stay on the trail, get to the island. For a long time after, she had woken in the empty lot and then been taken to the southern reach for processing. Ghostbird had thought she was dead, that she was in purgatory, even though she didn't believe in an afterlife, that she wasn't even the original biologist from the 12th expedition, but a copy. So what's so cool about this part, this chapter and this section of this chapter is that it's such a great exploration of identity, because we know that Ghostbird is a copy. She knows for sure, we know, Control knows, What does that mean? What does that mean? Does it make her less significant as an entity, as a person? And she's kind of wrestling with this in her mind. There was not just the question of whether she was really alive, but if so, who she was indeed. There was a sense of projection of it happening to someone else, that she was only the interim solution. But only when they had burst through into Area X had she truly gained the upper hand on her unease, her purposelessness. Something had turned on or come back, right? Because she's returning home, I guess, as some sort of proof that she was not the biologist, that she was some new thing that could, wanting to survive, cast out her fear of drowning as belonging to another. Wherever the biologist would have gone, that is where I will go. You want a lived-in life because you don't have one. The brightness had left her, but something else had stepped in to replace it. What is that thing? Counter-shading, she'd said. You can know a thing and not know a thing. A grebe's markings from above are obvious. You cannot miss a grebe from above. Seen from below, though, as it floats in the water, it's practically invisible. Grebe, a bird, another bird. All of this is a disguise. You've never walked through an ecosystem that wasn't compromised or dysfunctional, have you? You may think you have, but you haven't. So you might mistake what's right for what's wrong anyway. Whereas she was not yet committed to anything other than wanting to know herself and Area X. So I hope you can see now that really, this book, it's not so much about Area X, and it's not what causes so much. It's about personal journeys, right? Everyone is having a personal journey of discovery, hopefully, right? Figuring out who they are, where they fit in, maybe what their purpose is. But eventually they reached the rag tied to the reeds, saw the yellowing cathedral, a word that he's used numerous times, beyond, stuck in the mud and sunk halfway. What the hell is that? Control asked. It's dead, she said. It can't harm us. Sunken into the middle were the remains of a hideous skull and a bleached and hardened mask of a face that stared sightless at them, fringed with mold and lichen. The moaning creature, she said. The moaning creature we always heard at dusk, that had chased the biologist across the reeds. One of my favorite scenes in the entire series. What remained was a skeleton that looked uncannily like the confluence of a giant hog and a human being, a set of smaller ribs suspended from the larger, like a macabre internal chandelier, and tibias that ended in peculiar nub-like bits of gristles scavenged by birds and coyotes and rats. What's cool about this is Vandermeer, he was on set with Annihilation, the film by Alex Garland, and I'm noticing a lot of stuff reading this that Alex Garland didn't know about by reading the books because he only read the first one. He did not read the entire trilogy. So my guess is that he was picking Vandermeer's mind of other elements that might be useful in the other books, but he could put in the movie he's making because he's not making any sequels. And this is very reminiscent of the weird bear-like creature that had the moans in the film, if you've seen it. It's been here a while, Control said. Yes, it has. Alive just 18 months ago, and yet now in a state of advanced decay. The rate of decomposition was unnatural. So this was a person once. Possibly. It might also have been a failed double. She didn't think she was a failed double like this creature. She had purpose, free will, right? She's trying to convince herself of that anyway. Perhaps a copy could also be superior to the original. Wow, she's getting a little arrogant there, right? Create a new reality by avoiding old mistakes. I love that because I talked about this at the end of, it was the end of Authority, I think, where to me it's Vandermeer might be exploring the idea that, we don't have second chances. We only have one life, one biological life that we know of anyway. We make mistakes, and sometimes or often we want to go back and remedy those. We want to do it all over again. And it seems like he's really playing with that here, but also potentially pointing out that it's an impossibility, even though there is technically a double. I have your past in my head, he told her. I can give it back to you. She conceded that she now remembered everything up to the point at which she had been scanned and atomized or replicated by the crawler that lived in the tunnel tower, the moment of her creation, which might have been the moment of the biologist's death. So we distinctly remember that. I think I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if the biologist died there and then created the double, because again, that's very reminiscent of the film Annihilation, or if the biologist herself kind of overpowered this touch of the crawler. I shouldn't say overpowered, but there was like a mutual understanding here that the crawler or Area X, whatever you want to call it, and the biologist sort of were like, okay, you belong here. I will give you autonomy. I will give you a purpose. I will give you free will. Why had her other self been so careless with the words on the wall, for example? Why hadn't she confronted the psychologist director as soon as she knew about hypnosis? What had been gained by going down to find the crawler? Everybody, well, one person out there was asking all of these questions, so you know now that Vandermeer was thinking them, And now that she is able to kind of look back on sort of her past, she's she's wondering, why the hell would somebody do that? Among the misunderstandings between her and Control, having to make clear that her need for lived-in experience to supplant memories not her own did not extend to their relationship, whatever image of her had been carried. But standing there in front of the skeleton of the moaning creature, Control said, "That I might end up like this, some version of me? We all end up like this, Control, eventually. But not quite like this, because from those eye sockets, from the moldering bones came a sense of a brightness still, a kind of life. The director might have been wrong about the biologists, but perhaps you're the answer." "I'm not an answer," she said. "I'm a question." Ooh, that's deep. That's very deep. It's also very much a parallel to the conversation that Saul and Gloria are having a little bit, right? Talking about answering questions and what questions are and what they do. The skeleton before them had been picked clean. The discolored bones were rotting, the tips of the ribs already turned soft with moisture, most of them broken off, lost in the mud. Above, the stork still banked and wheeled this way and that in an intricate, synchronized aerial dance more beautiful than anything ever created by human minds. Wow. So she's, witnessing the beauty of this whole thing, of Area X, and how perhaps it's better than anything we could have created, whatever this thing is. Which brings us to 00003, the director. On the weekends, your refuge is Chipper Star Lanes, where you're not the director of the Southern Reach, but just another customer at the bar. This is very similar to what Control did. Remember when he was he was fighting his hypnosis and he was getting drunk off his ass and wandering from bar to bar and doing all that stuff. This is very similar. So the director, we're kind of getting a glimpse of her. Remember making her notes on her napkins and so on and so forth. Jim Lowry's people back at Central might know the place, might be watching and listening, but you've never met anyone from the Southern Reach there. Even Grace Stevenson, your second in command, doesn't know about it. Usually start out front on Chipper's rotting but still functional Safari Adventure miniature golf course. Afterward, you'll go inside and bowl a few pickup games with anyone who needs a fourth. Everything here is still close to Area X, but as long as no one knows, that information can keep on killing the customers as slowly as it has over the past decade. So what does that mean? Does that mean Area X is doing something, or is she just implying that, you're going to die slowly, it's going to overcome everything, take over everything? And I don't know. Let me know what you think that means. It's been rusting for a long time. Now it's become a dull black, punctuated by tiny reddish-brown starfish. Starfish, more biological. She's more biological terms are referencing the all of the badges, right? The badges on the ceiling. Some nights when you stay late and the bar crowd thins, you write down on a napkin or a coaster a point or two you just can't leave alone. Some of the continual puzzle questions thrown at you by Whitby Allen. An impressive document backs up Whitney's ideas. We all know this one. A masterpiece entitled Combined Theories, a Complete Approach. We also see here a list of conditions required for Area X to exist, according to Whitby. An isolated place, an inert but volatile trigger, a catalyst to pull the trigger, an element of luck or chance in how the trigger was deployed, a context we do not understand, an attitude toward energy that we do not understand, an approach to language that we do not understand. This sounds like he's definitely encapsulating everything we've encountered in the story so far. But for a while, too, with Whitby's help, you are arrows shot straight at a target. There are breakthroughs in expedition equipment, like enhanced field microscopes and weaponry that doesn't trigger Area X's defenses. More expeditions begin to come back intact, and the refinements in making people into their functions. But you chart the progress of Area X's reclamation of the environment. For a while, the consensus is that the situation has stabilized, that the news is improving. What? Things are getting better? Holy shit, they're figuring stuff out? Not really, but as years pass, with Lowry's influence more and more corrosive, data pulled out of Area X duplicates itself and declines to be interpreted, as Whitby puts it. But Lowry's the problem because Lowry keeps your secret, that you grew up in what became Area X. But nobody knows that she was the little girl, Gloria. Pittman, your nominal boss at Central. We've never heard of a Pittman. I don't think so. Let me know down below if we have. By the time you're on the 11th cycle of expeditions, you're more and more drained, and Central's plans begin to change. The flow of new personnel, money, and equipment has been reduced to a trickle as Central spends most of its time crushing domestic terrorism and suppressing evidence of impending ecological destruction. It sounds like they gave up. They're just like, hey, we're not funneling money into this thing. It's not going anywhere. So we'll just do other things while the world collapses, I guess. But always worried in a continual low-grade fever sort of way that someone at Southern Reach or Central will discover your secret. Your other sanctuary is the roof of the Southern Reach building. You share this sacred place with only one person, Grace. We remember Grace. It's there staring out at the prehistoric swamp, the miles of dark pine forest that you and Grace come up with all the nicknames. The tunnel or topographical anomaly in Area X you refer to as El Topoff, riffing on a strange film Grace once saw with her girlfriend. That film was El Topo by Jodorowsky. Yeah, weird movie. I've seen it. Bizarro. He's a bizarro dude. So it's fitting. It's on the roof that you first mentioned to Grace your idea of sneaking across the border into Area X. Why do you let Lowry tell you what to do? Grace says to you one afternoon. You remind Grace that there is a part of the kingdom you do control that Lowry doesn't get to influence. What comes out of Area X from the expeditions? Interesting. That shadow, that faint outline of a face, is that familiar? Would it be wrong of you to believe it means something? Saul Evans, perhaps? It's just a quick jaunt over El Topoff and back. No one will ever find out. Do you think you can convince Whitby? Yes, I do. Whitby's so invigorated by the opportunity that you can almost forget the whole idea is dangerous. It's a relief because you realize that weekend that if Whitby hadn't said yes, you might have called the whole thing off. Well, we know that just doesn't happen. Through the door, on your way to Area X, you feel a kind of pressure that bends you low. This is so cool because we remember that Cheney was it Cheney or Whitby? I can't remember. They were describing what it's like to enter Area X, and we get it perfectly right here. See a black horizon full of shooting stars, their trails bleeding so rich and deep across the non-sky that you squint against the brilliance of that celestial welder's torch. A sense of teetering, of vertigo. But each time you lurch too far to one side or the other, something nudges you back toward the center, as if the edges, closer than they seem, curl up at a more severe angle. Your thoughts start quick, then slow, something stitching between them you cannot identify. The impulse comes to stop walking, to just stand there, in the corridor between the real world and Area X for an eternity. Wow, such a beautiful, crazy, cosmic horror description right there. While hypnotized, Whitby shuffles along, eyes closed, his face a twitching mass of tics as if he's having an intense dream. I don't know if, I'm guessing Area X changed Whitby, right? He wasn't just a weirdo all along, even though he does seem kind of like a weird dude, even before then. And he's tied to you by the wrists with a nylon rope. The molasses feel Whitby told you to expect comes next. A sense of wading through thigh-high water, the resistance that means you are close to the end. Until the resistance falls away like a breath held too long and then released, and you both stumble through the door and out into Area X. Can you walk? You ask Whitby. Of course I can walk. Enthusiastic, but a kind of brittle sheen behind it, as if something has already been stripped away underneath. Which I think we know what that is, right? His mental health. You had reviewed those toxic Area X video clips from the doomed first expedition, not to seek answers with some measure of guilt, to seek a connection with the wilderness you'd known as a child. So this is what's cool, is that it's an interesting, I would love to see this on film, because she's watching these films and it's just the most terrible, horrific stuff going on. And she's just like looking through all of that chaos to try to find this connection where she grew up, to try to find answers and how she relates to it. There you can see the line of rocks near the lighthouse, the shore already a little different than, as if Whitby's terroir could be traced through the patterns left by the surf. The trails too, a dark stillness of the pine trees and the thick underbrush modeled by a strangling fruit, the memory of being disoriented and lost in the thunderstorm at the age of 6, of emerging from that forest not knowing where you were. After the storm and the startling revelation of open space and sunlight, you'd encountered a huge alligator, which is actually in the film, that's another thing that reminds me, blocking the narrow path. You'd taken a running start and jumped over it. The runningless scream toward the end is away from something, not towards something. You thought of them as perfunctory screams, an organism that knows there is no point in fighting back, the body capitulating and the mind letting it. You see how he's going back and forth without scene breaks or anything like that. It's so great because often that's how our minds work. We'll be consuming something or thinking about something, and then it reminds us of something else, and we kind of just boomerang back and forth, back and forth. They had no cottage by the sea to return to, no mother pacing the deck, worried out of her mind, grateful for your sudden grimy, soaked appearance. So she's comparing, these people who are running for their lives in Area X on the video with her being lost as a child, and they're hopeless where she has hope, right? There's no one waiting for them. Bypassing the route to base camp, you head for the topographical anomaly with the urgency of a ticking clock driving you. Someone off camera on the second day of the first expedition saying, "I want to go home." And Lowry goofing around, so confident, saying, "What do you mean? This is our home now. We've got everything here, everything we need, right?" Of course we do. This is a pristine wilderness. We don't need to go back. There are other borders within Area X, other gauntlets, and you have passed through the one to get to the topographical anomaly. And once there, you know immediately the tower isn't made of stone, and so does Whitby. This is so cool. I'm glad we got this finally. The tower is breathing. There is no ambiguity about it. The flesh of the circular top of the anomaly rises and falls with a regular rhythm of a person deep in sleep. Will it wake up if you're inside? The opening leading to the darkness resembles a maw more than a passageway. The stairs from the curling snarl of crooked teeth, the air expelled, smelling of thick rot. I would love to see a rendition of this. I should have Googled this earlier. I can't go down there, Whitby says. Then I'll go, you offer. Months from now, you will wake sore and bruised as if your body cannot forget what happened, and this is the only way it can express the trauma. Inside, it's different than in the fragmentary reports brought back by the other expeditions. The living tissue curling down the wall is almost inert. The feeble wanderings of the tendrils that form the words so slow you think for a moment it's all necrotic tissue. Nor are the words a vibrant green as reported, but a searing blue, almost the color of a flame on a stovetop. You don't read the words because you have long seen that as a kind of trap, a way to become distracted. The words on the wall are not getting fresher but darker, seeming to wink out as you come upon them, until finally you glimpse a light far, far below, so far below it's like a glowing flower in a hole in the bottom of the sea, a glimmering, elusive light that through some magician's trick also hovers right in front of your face, giving you the illusion that you can reach out and touch it if you only can find the courage to extend your hand. Wow, so that is so much like the ending of Annihilation. If you haven't seen the film, now's the time to watch it, or I guess maybe you could watch it after we finish the book. But you'll notice a lot of similarities. A figure sits hunched along the side of the left-hand wall, staring down the steps. A figure with a head bowed, turned away from you. You come closer, drawn by this impossible thing, sit on the step next to him. His eyes are shut. His face is illuminated by a dark blue glow that emanates from within, as if his skin has been taken over, and he is as porous as volcanic rock. He's fused to the wall or jutting out from it, like an extension of the wall, something that protrudes but might be retracted at any moment. Are you real? You ask, but he says nothing in reply. Your fingers graze his forehead. Do you remember me? You shouldn't be here. You need to get off these rocks. The tide's coming in. Ooh, that's such a great response because he's talking about his past. He's seeing her. He's recognizing her anyway, in some way of his, as a little girl, Gloria, not her in this strange place. Now you can hear the vast, all-consuming hum of some mighty engine from below, that impossible flowering light, its fluctuating, shifting, turning into something else. And his eyes snap open, wide against the darkness. He's no different than when you last saw him, has not aged, and you're 9 again, and the light below is coming up toward you, coursing up the steps toward you fast, and from above you can hear a distant echo of Whitby screaming from the top of the tower, as if he's screaming for both of you. Wow. Hell of a chapter, hell of a few chapters. This is such a great start. Jeff Vandermeer is wasting zero time. He's being incredibly efficient with the storytelling here, and I'm loving it. Not only because this whole novel doesn't have a massive page count, but he has so many POVs to deal with. So let's talk about what we're going to read next time. I think we should read through chapter 8, if I remember correctly. I think that's another 50 or 60 pages. But let me know, how are you feeling about this? There's so much to talk about. Join the Discord if you're not there already. I'm assuming you are if you're watching this far into the video series. But we know now that the psychologist is so obsessed with learning something about herself, about her connection to Area X, and of course Saul Evans. We know that the ghost bird is trying to create some significance of herself or for herself, and Control is just there kind of along for the ride, I guess. I'm really curious how Control is going to fit into this whole situation, because I think it's pretty clear so far about the psychologist and ghost bird, and of course Saul Evans, who is the victim of this little pinprick that becomes something far, far greater. So let me know down below, how are you feeling so far? Do you have any predictions? Also, don't forget to join the, like I said already, the discussion on the Discord server. And I will see you in the next video where we are covering chapters 4 through 8. Thanks for watching. Thanks for hanging out with me. And I will see you guys in the next one.